What's good, y'all? And welcome to another preseason preview video. For this one, we're going over to the Western Conference for the first time this year to talk about the San Antonio Spurs. So in this video, I'm going to be going over all of the offseason moves the Spurs made, as well as look into the future and see maybe what we can expect from them going into this season. If you guys are new, make sure you subscribe and hit the like button, and let's get into the new additions the Spurs made. The Spurs were active in all aspects of free agency this year, bringing in Chris Paul as a free agent, Harrison Barnes as a trade, and Stephon Castle in the draft. I like the pickups of both Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes because they both fit holes that the Spurs have on the roster, positions of need. But then also, I really like the veteran leadership that both of these guys can bring to the team. Obviously, the Spurs are a super young team still, so bringing in a guy like Chris Paul, who is one of the best at controlling the game that we've ever seen at the point guard position, has some of the best basketball IQ that we've ever seen. I really like the fact that he can go out there and kind of just help settle this team down and kind of get them into sets more. We saw last year they struggled a lot at the point guard position, so bringing in a guy like Chris Paul in his mind, I really do like. And then also Harrison Barnes coming in for that wing position. He has been a vet in the NBA for a while now. He's won championships, been on teams that are really high contenders. He's been on teams that were a little bit disappointing. He's done it all, really, so I really like his veteran leadership that he can come to this team. And also, when the Spurs traded for him, they also got a pick swap for taking on his contract. Big W. I also really like the pick of Stephon Castle in the draft this offseason. I think he can come into this roster and really, for the long term, fit exactly what they're looking for at that guard position. Being 6'6" with a 6'9" wingspan, he can guard multiple positions, will really go after it on the defense, and I think that's where we'll see his biggest impact as a rookie. But he is also great at getting to the basket and finishing. His playmaking, he's shown skills that he could maybe take on and be like a lead point guard at some point in the NBA. I really do like this draft choice, along with being coached by Pop, being coached by Chris Paul. I feel like Stephon Castle is destined to win. As we all know, though, you cannot bring in guys without losing some, so let's take a look at the guys the Spurs lost this offseason. The only key rotational piece that the Spurs are losing this offseason is Cedi Osman. They had to renounce his rights in order to bring in Harrison Barnes, and he is currently still a free agent as I'm recording this video. Cedi Osman is a good NBA player, very solid NBA role player, but the Spurs shouldn't really be too hurt that they're losing out on him. Like I mentioned, they had to renounce his rights in order to bring in Harrison Barnes, and I feel like that's a no-brainer because Harrison Barnes is going to be able to fill the role of Cedi Osman pretty easily, and honestly, better. Being that 3-and-D wing, he brought a lot of value to the Spurs, especially because they struggled a lot with shooting the ball, and he was an above average three-point shooter. Defensively too, he had good size and he gave good effort. But like I said, Harrison Barnes is probably a better shooter, probably a better defender. He's got bigger size as well, so basically everything Cedi can do, Harrison can do better. It's a no-brainer to replace him and kind of swap him out right there. Now that we have an idea of what this new Spurs roster looks like, let's take a look at a potential rotation. And this is what I think the rotation for the Spurs could look like this next season. You have Chris Paul and Devin Vassell in the backcourt with Harrison Barnes, Jeremy Sochan, and Victor Wembanyama rounding out the starting five. And then off the bench, you have Tre Jones, Stephon Castle, Keldon Johnson, Julian Champagnie, and Zach Collins. I really like the moves that the Spurs made this offseason. If you ask me, they had a huge increase in talent on this roster that we just saw. I feel like one of the places that we will see this increase in talent the most is at that point guard position. I already mentioned the fact that they brought in Chris Paul, and now they'll be having Tre Jones coming off the bench, and it was very, very obvious last season that they needed a true point guard on the floor. Early in the season, Pop was kind of messing around with the idea of having Jeremy Sochan run the point guard position. That obviously did not work. Then they were dealing with Malachi Branham, giving them some point guard minutes. Tre Jones was the only guy that really gave big impact. Out of all the rotational pieces last season, he had the highest on-off numbers. That just goes to show the impact of having a true point guard, what it can do for you. And now when you look at the roster, they should have 48 minutes of good, solid, true point guard minutes. Between Chris Paul and Tre Jones, they should pretty much be sharing those 48 minutes at all time. One of the two of them should be on the court. But if one of them is not, Stephon Castle, I think, can fit that mold. So between the three of them, there 100% should be a solid point guard on the court at all times, and I feel like that's going to really help the offense. And Wemby and Devin Vassell, Jeremy Sohan, all these young players, just having some guy that can kind of set up the plays, set up the offense, set up the sets, it's going to be night and day. Then also last season, we saw some flashes that this team could be very, very good defensively. A lot of those flashes, I will be honest, were Wemby, but also Jeremy Sohan showed that he could be one of the top wing defenders in the NBA. On the perimeter, he is absolutely clamps, and with his size being that 6'8", 6'9" range, he's very rangy, can guard multiple positions like that, and now he's being paired alongside another guy that is a pretty good wing defender in Harrison Barnes. Harrison also brings some size there too, so having a front court of Harrison Barnes, who's 6'8", Jeremy Sohan, who's 6'8", and then Victor Wembanyama at 7'4", that's going to be very, very hard to score on. And surprisingly enough, this depth that the Spurs have is pretty solid. I already mentioned the guards off the bench of Stephon Castle and Trey Jones. I really like that backcourt. But then also Keldon Johnson being that kind of scoring punch off the bench. I do feel like he could be the odd man out if they want to make a trade down the line or next offseason, whatever it is. Just kind of throwing that out there. I feel like he doesn't really fit too well with this core, but coming off the bench and being that scoring punch, I like what he could bring. Julian Champagnie bringing some shooting off the bench as well. Zach Collins at that stretch big position. He can give you some buckets. I really do like this team, and honestly, on paper, it looks a lot better than what I was thinking. But now that we got an idea of what the Spurs can look like this next season, let's take a look at their strengths. Victor Wembanyama is one of the most unique, one-of-a-kind players we have ever seen play in the NBA. And luckily for the Spurs, he is on their roster. This next coming season, the Spurs are going however far Vic can take them. I was trying to think if this was like a cop-out answer saying that Wemby was the Spurs' biggest strength. But when I really thought about it, no, it's not. It is not a cop-out answer. He really is the biggest strength of the Spurs team. Wemby had one of the most historic rookie seasons that I have ever personally seen, averaging 21 points, 10.5 rebounds, 4 assists, 4 blocks, a steal and a half. The efficiencies were kind of shaky at sometimes, but he's shown flashes of being super efficient. Like what can he not do, really? Oh, and I forgot to mention, he did all of that in less than 30 minutes per game. That's gonna increase this season, and so are those numbers. But even beyond the numbers, the impact that Vic's shown he can give on both offense and defense is really one of a kind. Defensively, we saw when he was on the court, the Spurs were one of the best defenses in the entire NBA. When he was off the court, they were the worst by far. He led the league in blocks per game last season as a rookie, and he's only going to be getting better. Not only does he block shots though, but the shots that he just alters or just deters the team, gets there, sees him, is like, I'm gonna pass this one out. I don't want to get packed right now. But his body is also super fluid, where he can move out in space. He can recover if he gets beat. Help side, he can come over. He really defensively is the perfect defensive specimen, if you ask me, at the center position at least. Then offensively, we saw a little bit of post-game, a little bit of mid-range work, the three-point shots there, obviously incredible lob threat and finisher. Out in transition, he made some plays. I really do think that the addition of Chris Paul is going to help him incredibly in the pick-and-roll game. Having a guy like Chris Paul there to really kind of settle that offense for him and help him get to his spots is only going to make it so much easier for Wemby. I said it before and I'll say it again, he truly is a one-of-a-kind player, and he is going to be the key to how far the Spurs go this offseason. This roster is far from perfect though, so let's take a look at the weaknesses of this team. Here we have the Spurs rotational players in order from most three-point attempts per game to least three-point attempts per game, along with what they shot from three. League average three-point percentage is 36.6%, so if you see the player in green, that means they're above average. If they're in red, they're below average. And I'm seeing a lot of red on this roster. I mentioned three-point shooting was a pretty big struggle for the Spurs last season, and in this season, I believe it's still going to be an issue for them. They did definitely try to help the issue by bringing in a guy like Harrison Barnes, who I think will be one of the top three-point shooters on this team next year. Chris Paul also can knock down a three-point shot. I wouldn't say he's a three-point shooter, but he can knock that down if needed. I'm also pretty confident in saying that Wemby's three-point percentage will be going up at least a little little bit this season as he grows and progresses as a player. And I also want to give a shout out to Devin Vassell for being able to be this efficient while being basically the only three-point threat on the Spurs last year. If I took out the new additions of Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes, Devin Vassell would have been the only above average three-point shooter on the team last season. That just blows my mind. Shout out to Julian Champagnie too. He was 0.1% off from being at league average. My point still stands though that this team is going to be pretty bad at shooting threes, and that is one of the most important things in the modern NBA. They will be improved, but they still will be bad. Now it is time for the fan segment. Here I have my boy Jimmy. He is a new Spurs fan, but a very dedicated Spurs fan. So I'm interested to see what he's got going on. Thank you for joining me, Jimmy.
No problem, man. I'm happy to be here. I'm a very big Victor Wembanyama fan. I've been watching him for a little bit, so when he went to the Spurs, I had to become a Spurs fan.
Had to, yeah. I'm sure there's a lot of other, like myself included, big Wemby fans that have a lot more eyes on the Spurs now. But we might as well get right into it. I'm going to ask you the first question here. What has been your personal favorite move so far that the Spurs did this offseason?
My favorite move, I feel like it's a lot of people's favorite move, it should be at least. It's Chris Paul going to the Spurs.
Yes.
That is, I feel like it's such a huge pickup, not even for like winning games or anything, just for like a mentality for the future, for like all of it, because everyone on the team is super young. So having that, like having Chris Paul be your mentor is great. It's like the greatest thing, like the best thing that could happen.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's like I guess maybe underrated part of it is the fact that I feel like he's going to be like basically a player coach at this point, like he'll be out there on the floor coaching up. Like we've seen him do it already with like young guys on the Golden State Warriors where like something will happen and he'll be like, yo, just look when this, like, point out a whole play, and then like just having that level of basketball IQ in the locker room alongside Popovich, I think it's going to be huge. And then also the actual like basketball part of it. The Spurs needed a point guard so badly, and now they have some guy that's known as the point god. He will get everyone in their space. You don't want to take any shots. He wants to just assist, get Wemby the ball, get them to sell the ball. So I'm really excited to see how he looks on the court and off the court, honestly.
Yeah, me too. And there was also another thing with that Chris Paul has, like, every team he's been on has been instantly, like, significantly boosted their winnings, which I imagine is going to happen again.
Yeah, I feel like this could be very similar to like that OKC Thunder team when they traded away Paul George and Russell Westbrook, brought in Chris Paul and like a young Shea, and he elevated that team. That team was looking like a lottery team, elevated it to a playoff team, and they were a game 7 away from making the second round. I don't think the Spurs will be that good, but I can definitely see what you're saying there, how he can elevate this team to maybe take a jump alongside when you have a guy like Wemby, how he's looking in the Olympics right now.
Oh my God.
Damn, anything can really happen.
Yeah, he's 20 years old and he's like leading the France team right now. It's just insane.
On to the next question though. Who do you think is the most underrated player on the Spurs right now going into this next season?
I think the biggest underrated player is going to be Jeremy Sohan, because if he takes a jump, like in shooting, I think, because I mean he's absolutely locked up on defense. He can pass the ball, but if he like takes a jump in just scoring, which he could definitely do, there's games last season where there was a couple games where he was just super aggressive and he was putting up good numbers and he was putting up crazy efficiency and he was being like, he would easily get to the paint, run and dunk, no problem. So I think if he gets his aggressiveness up and his shooting percentages up, which probably will, it's year 3 for him, year 4, so should be no problem to do that. And if he takes that jump, the Spurs will be looking a lot better.
Yeah, I agree on Jeremy Sohan being pretty underrated. I feel like the fact that he started off the season at the point guard position, out of position, like he's not a point guard. Like you said, he can pass and he's good as like a wing, a secondary, like connective passer, but he's not a point guard.
Yeah.
So I know obviously Pop realized that halfway through the season, moved him back to being forward. But I feel like a lot of people kind of saw him struggle at being a point guard and just now think that he doesn't really bring much to the table, but very far from the truth. I think you mentioned before, his defense is incredible. The playmaking is there. The scoring, he needs to get his jump shot down, but I also think having a point guard like Chris Paul to kind of set up an offense's could help everyone, including Jeremy, kind of elevate himself a little bit. But another guy that I think is pretty underrated is Devin Vassell. He was incredible, had a great season scoring wise last season for the Spurs, and I feel like he's just not talked about as like one of those up and coming young guys. And I personally think that he is. He's one of those young guys that could break out to be an all-star.
Yeah, I kind of forget that he's underrated in a sense, because like me and you watch him and we're like, oh yeah, this guy's unbelievable. This guy's so good. Like we just know. So like I forget that like the outside world, like casual NBA or whatever, just like doesn't know him. And he's putting up like he puts up like 22 a night, like 23 a night. Like, he's putting up good numbers.
And then real quick, right before we get you out of here, what are your expectations to the Spurs right now? We mentioned, you bring in Chris Paul, you bring in like some more talent on this roster. It's definitely a way better roster than what it was a year ago. But what are you really expecting from the Spurs team?
Yeah, I don't really have high expectations for them still. I just don't like, they're a super young team. It's the whole franchise player it's his second year here, so I mean I obviously expect him to take like a crazy jump. I mean, we've been seeing progress already. His efficiency in the Olympics has been unbelievable, so I think that I imagine he's going to keep that up. I mean, most of the time. And yeah, I think they maybe have a chance to get to the play-in, but even if they're not, like, it's no problem. Like, no one's going to be like, oh yeah, the Spurs, da 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 da. No one's going to be like talking trash about them, because there's no reason to. No one should expect really something crazy like make the playoffs. I feel like could be a reach, but I mean, also, I don't know. Victor Wembanyama could also just do that. So yeah, I don't have that much expectations for them, honestly.
I agree with that. I feel like yeah, like you said, with the West being so deep, like it would be hard for them to actually make the playoffs. But they're in that perfect spot where there's not expectations to make the playoffs, to make the play-in. But I can kind of see a situation where it could happen. So being in that situation where it's pretty much like, if you fail, it is what it is. But if you succeed, like, it's this big thing that no one, like, you're surprising everyone with how fast you were able to turn around. I feel like they're in a good spot for that. Where they'll end up in the standings, we'll have to see. But Jimmy, thank you again for coming on, man. I really appreciate it. Now it's time to go over the ceiling, the floor, and my expectations for the San Antonio Spurs this season. For the ceiling, I think that this team could just barely sneak into the play-in tournament and sneak into that 10th seed. I don't think that they would make the playoffs, because that means they would have to win 2 play-in games against some really high-quality Western Conference teams. But a lot of this is very heavily based on the idea that Vic could break out into an all-star, all-NBA level player already in year 2. And I know that sounds crazy, but when you watch Vic at the end of last season, when you watched him in the Olympics that are going on right now, it could definitely happen. Then when you look at the floor for the Spurs, I think that they can go as low as the 13th seed. I do think that they are very much better than Portland, and I do think they will be better than Utah, as long as they end up trading Lauri Markkanen, which looks like they probably will. They still are a super young team, this Spurs team, so I could definitely see if Vic does go through some struggles and doesn't break out to this all-star level player, yeah, they're still going to be pretty low in the standings. But if I were to give my expectations for the Spurs, I think they'll probably end up around that 11th seed, missing the play-in tournament just because the Western Conference is so deep. If they were out east, I would say they were a lock for a play-in, but this Western Conference, man, is different. I think we will see some progression from Vic to have him be maybe an all-star this year. I don't know if it will convert directly to winning right away, because this roster is still a little bit, like, it's a tier below a lot of the other play-in or playoff caliber teams that we're seeing. But they're making a step in the right direction. They're bringing in veteran talent to help this team win if Vic can really bring them to that level. They're still curating their young guys to become even better. I think it's going to be a very fun season for the Spurs this next coming season. Let me know what you guys think about the Spurs, though, in the comments below. Do you think Wemby will be an all-star? Do you think they will make the play-in tournament? Whatever your ideas are, let me know down in the comments below. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you leave it a like, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. In the description, there's links to all my social medias, so make sure you follow me on all those to keep up to date with me. Catch y'all.